Welcome to ModPath Chat, the official podcast of modern pathology, featuring interviews with authors and experts on the latest science, technology, and developments in the field of pathology. Your host, Dr. George Netto, is the editor-in-chief of Modern Pathology and the chair of pathology at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. Here's Dr. Netto.
Welcome to ModPath Chat. Today's guest is Matt Cecchini, an assistant professor of pathology from London Health Science Centre, which is in London, Ontario, not across the pond. He's an assistant professor at the University of Western Ontario there, and his interest is lung path and also digital pathology. So here's one of these up-and-coming digital whiz, and going to share with us his recent study, or his team's recent study, on application of digital pathology quantitation for cell density or cellularity in lung cancer. So thank you for coming, Matt.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Netto, for the opportunity to talk to you about our paper today. I really appreciate it.
It's an interesting paper, and hence we're here. And it seems like you're so into digital. When we started the conversation, for those of you who are going to see this on the USCAP YouTube channel, you'll see that his scope initially was up high. He almost shelved it, and but then he decided to bring it down a little bit, so at least is next to him. So he uses it still every now and then. It's not going to all be big. But he was telling me, Matt, you were sharing that you were betting with the pathologist, the senior pathologist, that you're going to get rid of the scope before they retire.
Yeah, right? Exactly. Yeah, and I think we're at a really exciting time in our profession. I think it's going to be the biggest change in hundreds of years as we move to this digital world, and I think it's really going to open up new opportunities and tools for us really to change and fundamentally improve our profession. And I'm really excited for the next 5 to 10 years in pathology. I think it's going to be a truly exciting time.
Wonderful. We'll bring you back in 5 years to see stand out how much progress. I'm a firm believer, so we're on the same page here, and hence some of the papers, including yours in Modern Path, are preparing our audience for this. Yeah. So let's focus on the study now, and tell me why did you do it? How did you think about cellularity and density?
Yeah, so actually it started out as like drawing on my whiteboard back behind me. I had a student in my office, and we were talking about staging in lung cancer, and we were talking about how the staging in lung cancer is based on the size of the tumor. And we kind of did this back of the envelope calculation of wondering whether the size of the tumor was actually just a surrogate measure for how many cells were there. And at the time we were exploring ways to identify tumor cells using digital pathology, and we thought this would be a great application to it, that we could take tumors and we could then use our emerging technologies to quantify the number of tumor cells and ask this kind of very simple question: is the outcome really just based upon the number of tumor cells there? And that's what's driving the staging. And the other thing that we realized as we were doing it is that in lung cancer, there's a grading element of it too, which is really hard to do often, where you have to find these different patterns of lung carcinoma. And in fact, the higher grade patterns have a higher density. They pack together more tightly. And so by actually quantifying the number of tumor cells, we're actually able to get both staging and grading information in one kind of surrogate measure. And then when we looked to see how that drove outcome, we found a really different amount in survival between these cases at a higher cellularity compared to the ones that are low. And so it kind of started. Yeah.
We'll come to the results at the end. Sounds sure. But wow, it sounds impressive. So back of the envelope and with the student, I want to mention that you had just finished your fellowship at Mayo, so in the beginning of the pandemic. So you started venturing into deep research very early. Good for you. So what was the cohort, and what was the technology that you used? What kind of algorithms you build in?
Yes.
Let's some detail there.
Yeah, definitely. So we utilized the TCGA data set, which actually offered up a bunch of abilities to do this study, because we actually did it during the pandemic. And there's a lot of restrictions on working in person, and so most of the co-authors of this are students in my lab that were working largely remotely. And so utilizing the TCGA really made that possible, because they could do that from anywhere. And the software we use is a program called QuPath, which is really powerful and can really allow you to do a lot of really phenomenal things with digital pathology. And the nice thing about it is it's free and open source. And so all of my students, even though they're working from home on their own laptops and things like that, were able to use the software and really do this kind of high-end analysis of these cases wherever they were.
But hopefully they're students, so they were supervised by you as a.
Oh no, definitely, yeah. And so it's but it's a way of doing it remote supervision, right? In a way, and it worked really well, especially with the pandemic restrictions, and that we're able to do it all virtually. And we developed kind of robust ways in which they could kind of share their data through QuPath and have it all validated and confirmed. And it really accelerated how we could do it, especially in the world at that time when there was lockdowns and restrictions, and people weren't even allowed in labs in that time in Canada. So,
So the cohort basically included adeno, a cohort data set of adeno and squamous, and so both, and it's 213 adeno and 90 squamous cell, and those are the patients from the TCGA. Now, so tell us a little bit how really in reality you annotate, like while you're building the algorithm, how cumbersome it is, because we keep hearing that's one of the challenges in building algorithms, that really it needs, of course, there are the newer, hopefully things are going to be with the machine learning and AI, you're not going to need much supervision while you're annotating. So tell us how you did this one.
Yeah, so a good thing about the TCGA is that it has slides from different centers, so that allows it to be more generally applicable. It's not just one center, but that also makes it a challenge. And so it's very hard to have algorithms apply across centers. As we all know, when we look at slides from consulting labs, the stain can look very different. And so that makes a large challenge from applying one algorithm on one slide and moving it across. And so we basically had to retrain our classifier across each slide, which takes a lot of work, right? And so, but there's new tools being built on this front, in that hopefully with these new tools we'll be able to apply algorithms across this immediately, right? Because the way that we did this would not be applicable to practice right now, right? We need more technology to be able to do this instantaneously, because it took us hours of work per each slide to actually get these annotations done and get the classifiers done, whereas in clinical practice, obviously don't have that time, right? But the tools are rapidly emerging that we'll be able to take any slide and just press a button, quantify the number of tumor cells. And even in some of the free open source platforms are getting really good at it as well. So I think with the next few years, that'll be definitely possible.
So let me get this right. So as it stands, if we apply the algorithm that you build, and clearly it's using QuPath, we're going to have to, on a case per case, do some adjustments, like you're saying, due to our own, almost like validated according to your own cohort.
And QuPath is a really good research tool. It's not a great tool for clinical practice because it's not locked down. You can change settings. But there's many other players who are building clinical tools in this space. And so I really see QuPath as a way to innovate and build and test hypotheses. But it's not designed in a way, because if you have a clinical grade software, you want something that's completely locked down. There's no challenges doing it. You can't change the settings. You just know it works every time. It's been completely and robustly validated. Whereas QuPath offers you more flexibility. You can do things quickly, test multiple hypotheses and move, but it's, yeah.
So because that's, what you're talking about, to be a clinical grade, you want it a CLIA grade, FDA approval and all what have you, and you can't, otherwise it's going to be an issue, right? A lot of variabilities.
Well, it depends on how you use it, right? So you can use QuPath for clinical applications. It's just you are the one that's ultimately responsible, right? And so like I use QuPath to help me count things. So it's got a really nice counting function where you just click a button and then it counts and it puts a little mark there. And so I use that for counting mitotic figures, right? But that doesn't need to be CLIA approved. It's just a thing that puts a dot where I click, right? And so it depends on how you use the tool, right? Just the same thing. I often use Excel to keep track of counts as well. And Excel is not CLIA approved, right? And so it depends on how you utilize it, right? If you use it as a black box that just does something in the background, then yes, you need the proper validations.
And that's what I meant, because I mean, if you're gonna bill it or report it as a digitally assessed, then it has to be apply certain parameters and consistencies and regulations, and I think that's a good thing. I know we all hate the regulations, but you want to get to a level where it's reproducible. Doesn't matter what lab. It's push a button, as you expressed. So it's fair to say this is a proof of principle. You just this is the first study to show that this can be done. So you started touching upon that, and I interrupted you in the intro about what you found, and which is really impressive. But we'll see, right? So tell me what is the correlations that you found?
Yeah, so tumors with a higher cell density, so a higher number of tumor cells in there, actually had a much worse prognosis than those who had a lower number of cells in them. And so it's really exciting preliminary data that, in this proof of principle, I think is the best way to describe it, and that we're now working on a kind of international validation cohort to see if this truly we can apply this across cases, to show, and it was very powerful, the difference we saw in cases between the cellularity, and I think it's because it's incorporating both stage and grade information into one measure, right? And from the standpoint of pulmonary pathology, one of the things I hate the most is having to estimate the patterns on a slide of so much is acinar, so much is lipidic, so much is micropapillary. And I see this as a potential way around that, right? Because the higher grade patterns like micropapillary and solid have a higher density, right? And then it takes out the bias of it as well, right? Because there's a lot of intra-observer bias in other studies that have shown that we're not very reproducible in what we call micropapillary complex glandular. Whereas if you just count the tumor cells, it's less likely to be biased, right?
So because you're saying it incorporates grade and stage. So are you inferring that really this is more like a common denominator that can be done in lieu of calculating all these patterns? And what do you mean by stage? How is it this factoring in stage?
Well, because in lung cancer, the stage for earlier lung cancer is largely based on the size of how big the tumor is, right? And so that's the T stage is driving that. And so that incorporates that element because just based on how big it is for the number of cells there. And then the density of the cells is the grade part. And we showed in the paper that the higher grade parts have a higher density because they're just packed more tightly together.
Because, and I think one thing probably you need to clarify to the audience. So you calculated density per space area, and then you multiply it by the area, and thus you get the total cellularity. And that part is a reflection of how big the tumor is, and the density is a reflection of the pattern. Correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yes, exactly.
Good. Because if I understand it, the audience understand it, because I'm not that savvy in these things, especially in lung cancer. Well, and you show some amazing Kaplan-Meier graphs. It's for both adeno and small cell and
squamous.
Adeno and squamous, and for also the entire non-small cell cohort. When you combine both overall survival and progression-free survival, seems to split the curve, as we say, right?
Yeah, definitely, and. The other thing that I think is important to look at is, does this, if you just have small biopsies, does that actually recapitulate that? And we had our lab had a poster presentation at USCAP last year where we showed that there was a correlation between the biopsies and the overall resection as well. So we're looking at this question too of, can we actually predict this based on a biopsy, right? So for patients who can't go to resection, and can we apply that as well?
Well, that would be interesting, because given what you just said, there are patterns. When you get the whole resection, there are different patterns, and small biopsy, you really don't have that luxury. Wonderful. And so what's next?
Yeah, so I think my lab's working on a number of digital pathology tools. I think it's an exciting time because there's all these really low-hanging fruit studies out there that are, so you can utilize these tools to really answer some really interesting questions with these, like there's a new tool that emerges every single day, right? And so we can apply these to some really interesting clinical questions and expand what we can do with our H&E, right? And that where each slide that we scan, we unlock 1 to 2 gigabytes of data, right? That's just sitting in there waiting for us to use. And so I think as we develop more and more tools, we're going to be able to do exciting things with this data and really transform the field of pathology.
And the next study for this, proof of principle is, and you referred to that, you're collecting cases, whole slides from different places and trying to see if you can validate in a different cohort.
Is exactly what we're doing, and then matching biopsies and resections to see how those work out.
Wonderful. And I'm sure you're going to send that to Modern Pathology, and you may get even a second podcast.
That sounds great. Hopefully within a few years we'll be back here. And thank you so much for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you. This has been a pleasure. It's so exciting to see young pathologists like yourself start to impact the field. This is the hope, and that's why pathology is becoming the go-to specialty. I don't know if you know, I don't know how it is in Canada, but in the US, this was the first year ever all the match point spaces were filled, slots were filled, except one, which is a record, I believe.
That's great.
Compared to other specialties, like emergency medicine, 1/3 of the spots were not filled. So.
Wow. Yeah, Matt Quick and I do a session at USCAP on medical student recruitment, and it's called like seeing the light of the hidden gem of pathology. And that's I think it's becoming less and less of a hidden gem. I think people are realizing that there's a real light in pathology, and it's really the especially to be in, and there's a lot of excitement in it. So I think I think it's going to shift, and that we'll have lots of people wanting to be pathologists, because especially with all these tools, I think it's going to be truly transformative.
Absolutely. You just gave me an idea for another podcast. We need to have both of you and discuss that because I'm sure a lot of medical students and applicants are looking for something like this. That's wonderful, and congratulations again on the paper, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nuno.
Any opinions expressed in this podcast are the speaker's own and do not represent the views of Modern Pathology, Springer Nature, UAB, or USCAP. Your ModPath Chat host and scientific director is Dr. George Netto. Producers are Christina Crow, Amber Jackson, Dr. Sarah Jang, and Dr. Catherine Ketchum. Technical direction is provided by Kaminsky Productions, music by Mitch Neubauer. Thanks to the authors, reviewers, and editors of Modern Pathology for making this podcast possible.